See who's here. All right, I see you. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're able to join us tonight. I'll give you some time to get your mic up and running, and then you can tell me all about your garden. There, I unmuted you, if that helps. Okay, it is a bit early, so we're just waiting on the rest. And you feel free if you wanted to share a little bit about what you've been up to in the garden and how have you been, and whether you got our seed sprouting packets. And if you just want to listen in, that's fine too. There are a few other people coming in, I believe, tonight, so. Hey, Dave. Oh, I can't turn on the mic because there is noisy stuff going on, but I wanted to check in. Oh, great. Yes, of course. Great. Well, you're welcome to come in, come in anytime and just listen in. If nobody shows up, and nobody has questions, I mean, the first and foremost is that this is a venue for anybody who needs help or garden advice to ask their questions, and that we can just zero in on that person and their specific situation. So if you have any of that sort, please let me know, or please let us know, and we will deal with those questions as well as we can. And then if there's any time, or if nobody shows up, or if nobody has any questions, then we just go and we have something prepared. But yeah, either way, it'll be a lot of learning gardening. So, is your mic working, Dave?
Yeah, I'm just adding another slide or two. So.
Okay, to your presentation.
Yeah, just give me a minute.
Okay, great. All right, so we will have, so sometimes people come in at like 8:30 or in 15 minutes into, and we're already starting to talk, and we might just like cut off our, our presentation and to make sure that their concerns or their needs are addressed. So if that happens, yeah, we will prioritize the people who have any questions. Okay. So it's 8 o'clock, and I was going to talk about how to plan your garden this 2019. So the winter is one of my favorite times to do that because you're itching to grow, but there's not much to do except indoors. And that's why we sent those seed packets, so that you can still keep on growing and eating healthy food indoors. But this is my favorite time to just stop and be able to think, what do I want my garden to look like in the new year? So with that, I am going to share my screen, and actually I was in the middle of watching one of the DIYers videos that they sent. So maybe I will share my screen and we'll watch what she's done so far in the fall. Can you see it, Dave?
Yep.
All right.
So she's already got her beds marked out.
Yes, this is Daria.
And she has, what is that, fence around the exterior to keep the deer?
Yes, chicken fence. She's actually talking. Do you hear the audio?
No.
No, okay. She says, to make this whole garden, she said, that is her retaining wall.
To the backyard.
Yes. So she built those stairs from the bricks that she found all over her property. So she has to climb those bricks to get up there. She says the sprouts are still in there hanging out. What are those sprouts that we sent her? I think radish sprouts. That's great. They're still green. Nice. Cute. Oh, well done, Daria. So she sent that in really a few minutes ago just to show that what she had done over the fall. And I think that's a great accomplishment because she basically single-handedly did this with her son and with no garden experience beforehand. So I'm glad she did this. Yay, congratulations. Okay, screen sharing has stopped as the shared window is closed. Okay, well, let me go ahead and do my 10 crucial steps or 10 questions you ask when you do permaculture gardening. And maybe, Carrie, you've already heard a little bit of this presentation in the past. And if you have, it's a shorter overview than what I have previously done, but it's a good thing. It's a good mnemonic device so that we can, whenever I design, I actually sing this song so that I can remember how to design it. So, design my garden. So here goes. Present. Preview presentation? Okay, so 10 crucial steps to permaculture gardening. The first thing, so the song goes like this. First thing is to observe. And so in the previous video, I did a lot on observation. You probably are maxed out on that already. And if you've seen that video, it's currently on our blog. And it's how to observe for 10 minutes a day for 10 days. So this is a very doable thing. And I go into it in a video that's currently on our blog. And I will link that video to the email notes that I will send. So first thing is to observe, to think holistically. So when you design your garden, you also want to think, what is your goal for this garden? What is your intent? Who is affected by this? And consider your property as a whole. Don't just focus in on one bed in isolation, although that is what we're going to do actually in this first go round of design, is we're going to zero in on one garden bed, but not before we look at the whole property, just a little bit of an overview of that property. And that's what we mean by holistically. include all elements you can think of in your design. So by elements, I mean there's a tool shed perhaps somewhere, there's a compost bin. Look at that. Include that when you design, have those in the backdrop. So for instance, Daria earlier, her big thing was the retaining wall was a big part of her design. She's always thinking how hard it was to get up to that garden space, but she always had that was like the backdrop to her design is that retaining wall is a big feature of this garden to get, even though she's zeroing in on that garden bed. And then take a soil sample for testing so you have an even more complete picture. First thing is to observe, 2, think holistically, 3, note your zones of use. Oops, okay, so the text on this one does not make sense. But the zones of use are really what in permaculture we use to show how far something is from the house or settlement. So your house, your home is considered zone 0, and then by frequency of visitation is how you determine the other zones. So this not necessarily always occur in a perfectly round circle from your home. It can be like in a little different, it can take different shapes, but it's how frequently do you get to visit a certain part of your garden. So we're usually, most of our clients have small spaces, so we rarely ever get to zone 5, or if it is, it's somebody else's, it's a common area already, or zone 4. But mostly why we want to look at it this way is so that we put the plants that are closer, that we need more often, in the zones that are closer to us. So a kitchen garden is preferably in zone 1. Market crops are zone 2, and that would be like more of the things that you don't need all the time, like herbs, would be zone 1, and then zone 2 would be something like onions, I guess, and then carrots, and then zone 3 would be your nut trees and your larger fruit trees. Zone 4 is just kind of wilderness, and you just need if you need wood cutting, then you can get it out there. And then zone 5 is actually wilderness, inspiration, meditation. So you don't really cultivate zone 5 anymore. So when you design your garden, you start out by putting, the first thing is to observe, 2, think holistically, 3, then you note your zones of use. So you put in your zones like so, and then you can even add, like, are there any places where I see frequent deer visiting over here, or this place is really prone to the summer wind or the summer sun. This one is open to the view of the neighbors, so on and so forth. So these are things that you would also put in your holistic overall design. First thing is to observe, 2, think holistically, 3, note your zones of use, 4, know your local climate. So, oops, I rushed a little bit too fast there. So local climate, and I don't have a graphic for that yet, but except for this here, and let me move this so you can see it there, is what would your average highs and lows be? So you have to, when you get into design, check out what your monthly averages are so you can design for the spring, the summer, and then the fall, winter again this coming year. First thing is to observe, 2, think holistically, 3, note your zones of use, 4, know your local climate, 5, know your microclimate. So what is your microclimate? So now in this slide, I have thought about microclimate a lot. And basically, I think that it boils down to these 3 basic conditions. And by 3, it's actually times 2 because they're the opposite of each other. But hot and cold, damp and dry, and windy and sheltered. And Dave, chime in if you think I've missed something. And if we have, then we'll just add another arrow on the other side. But those are the major microclimates that I look out for when I look for microclimate in my yard. So I ask, where is it? Does it tend to be colder because that's where I'm going to put my cold weather crops. Where does it tend to be baked by the sun? And by the way, and I have this picture down here because if you use a lot of stone and bricks, you know those areas where the plants will be touching the stone or bricks will be hotter during the summer, or they'll be warmer during the winter. Or they'll be hotter, or because the stone or the brick material will absorb the heat during the day and kind of keep them warm at night. Where would it be dry or damp? Where does it tend to be wet? And where does it tend to be dry? Where in my garden is it windy? And where would I need to put a windbreak so that I don't have my plants all, when a big storm comes or big hurricane comes, then it doesn't all get annihilated. Where can I build in like bushes or windbreaks, and where is it already sheltered? So that's microclimate. A microclimate is affected by, or affects, what affects microclimate? What creates microclimate? When you're close to the water, water can have a cooling effect on the land. When you are close to the water, it can also affect your wind turbulence. Your topography definitely plays a role in creating your microclimate. So it's good to know your topography, which is the next part. But what kind of soil you have can have a big effect on microclimate. For instance, if you live in a sandy area, in a sandy desert, then when the winds blow, not only do you have like a wind, you have windbreak, but you basically have like to build in sand breaks or from the dust. The direction of your home can create a sunnier or a cooler microclimate. Building materials of your home, like I said before, the bricks will absorb the light and the heat and release it out to your plants in the evening. Water, wind, soil, and sun. So all of these affect microclimate. Now, sixth, so first thing is to observe, to think holistically. 3, note your zones of use. 4, know your local climate. 5, find your microclimate. 6, know topography. Now, topography, one may think, oh, I don't really need to know that much, but it depends on where you live. It's good to know what your elevation is, and to observe how much flooding you get during a rainstorm, because all of that is affected by topography. Especially, I know we have some GIYers in Utah, and you have the mountains right on your, like the east side of most of the developments, of the suburban developments, and that topography affects your local climate and your microclimate greatly. It affects how much water you'll get, that's precipitation, how much snow. In fact, topography also affects how, for instance, in this bottom picture, it shows the lake effect. And if you're wondering what lake effect is, lake effect snow is that when when wind blows across a body of water, then the warm water evaporates and creates like a snowstorm. But in the case of, this is Cleveland on the top and this is Utah. In the case of Utah, they do not have as big snowstorms as Cleveland or the Great Lakes area, because they have these mountains or Raft River Mountains there that actually mitigate the effect of the snow. So that's just interesting to know. I just put that in there because I learned that, and I know that we have a lot of GIYers in these areas. And then topography affects your dwelling and structures, because even if you live in a suburban development like we do, and I feel like, oh, we're a little bit closer to the ocean, but we're not mountain range, pretty flat. I can see how the water always comes into our development, our housing development, and kind of pools into the houses actually. So there is like an overflow that goes into a basin, an overflow basin. But if you realize that, then you can build your garden, you can dig it in a way that you work against that. You feed the water out to your plants and out out far away from the foundations of your home. So more on water. First thing is to observe, 2, think holistically, 3, note your zones of use, 4, know your local climate, 5, find your microclimate, 6, note topography. How much water runs off your roof? And this is water, the water equation from Brad Lancaster, who is the authority on passive rainwater capture, especially in the dry lands. Even if you only get an inch of rain, you can get a lot of water just from that 1 inch rain event. And to realize how much that is, you just have to plug this equation into your design. So you find out what is your roof's surface area, and by that I don't mean like, it basically, for us it's 1,600 square feet. Most houses I think are about that 1,600 to 1,800, depends on your roof, and if your roof are flat, that's your surface area. Doesn't matter what the slope is, and then you multiply it by 623 gallons divided by 1,000 square feet, and that would be how many gallons of water you would capture on your roof in a 1 inch rain event. And from there you can see, where can I direct all that water so that I don't have to be getting the water from the grid? First, so like back to our song, right? First thing is to observe, 2, think holistically, 3, note your zones of use, 4, know your local climate, 5, find your microclimate, 6, note topography. How much water runs off your roof? Where do people go? So number 8 is all about access. What paths do people normally follow? What paths make sense? What paths do the animals take? And how can I recommend certain paths through the landscape that I will design by putting down stone tiles here, for instance, to say pass here instead of there? To give you an idea of how poorly we designed our garden to begin with, this was our keyhole garden where we tried to maximize the spaces that we could grow in. And this keyhole was basically this was blocked off. It blocked off the entrance, which was over here, of our gate. So in the end, we had to rebuild this, and here you can see it. We just put an opening there. We didn't even, because it was just not the way that people were, it was so inconvenient to get through and work in our garden because of that. One more time there. So you see the access is much better. Would have been better if we designed it with access in mind. And we observed first. So, but that's okay. That's the whole thing. The first year is really observation. So if your design doesn't turn out right, then you refine your design every year as you go along. So first thing is to observe, 2, think holistically, 3, note your zones of use, 4, know your local climate, 5, find your microclimate, 6, note topography. How much water runs off your roof? Where do people go? Investigate the weeds if you don't know. So this is a really fascinating topic, and I think we had a Weed ID challenge a while back. We will have it again every year. Just to encourage us, a field book is also awesome to find out what currently exists in your garden bed before you introduce new things into it. And it doesn't mean we will encourage all of those weeds. Weeds are good. Weeds can be good, as we found out throughout the years. But we want to grow more of what we need, what we want for ourselves, right? So we want to know what's growing there currently, just to know what it is. First, to find out what kind of soil exists there, because certain soils support certain weeds. And second, to see how we can use or incorporate perhaps some weeds already in the periphery to help us transition to a vegetable garden that we want. And so that's the importance of finding out your existing vegetation. And then finally, make it look pretty. Find a shape in your yard So aesthetics has these points to remember: shape, repetition or pattern, scales or proportion, movement to a focal point, balance and diversity, harmony and color. And in the core course, I will do a whole module just on aesthetics. But it is the last of all of the scales of permanence. What I've just sung is called Yeoman Scales of Permanence. And it's like the least important, but it's nice to have because that aesthetics is a yield in itself. It brings you joy. So by shape, I mean, this is both looking at a design that I did holistically, looking at the holistic picture and placing a shape, the shape of the Nautilus, Fibonacci spiral into a design. And I sort of, instead of boxing it in or looking just like creating little kidney gardens, kidney-shaped gardens around the area, I wanted to actually, I realized that there was a depression around here and the water was pooling all the way in their back. And to prevent the water from further creating a puddle or a pond, I thought that it would be good to have like certain terraces, but the terraces didn't need to be straight. They could be in the shape of a spiral if you looked at it from afar. And the spiral creates movement too, because you'd never know where it ends. Your eye always follows where that shape is going, and it keeps that garden interesting, but it's also beautiful. So that's just a sketch. It was never implemented, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean to say our shapes need only be natural shapes, like spirals and waves and such. They can also be square shapes, like this beautiful square raised beds. And these are probably what we're going to zero in on. Just one of these square beds for your design. Like I mentioned earlier, repetition is also good in aesthetics. So you repeat certain patterns and you balance your garden by having diverse plantings, not just all around your garden, but within the garden beds. So what are the 10 steps to drawing your yard? Now we're ready to draw. We've done the 10 crucial steps to permaculture gardening. First, and if you don't get all of this, don't worry. This is a core course module, which isn't even released yet. This is just preview of things to come. First, draw the outline of your property. Then draw current access, current paths. Third, draw your key structural elements. And by that, I mean, where is the garage? Where is the compost bin? Where's the trash bin? Where's the playground area? 4, note your zones of use, like we mentioned earlier. 5, note those microclimate observations on your paper. So if it's super damp here, write that on the paper. Put as many notes on the paper that you use for on observation day, on design day, as you can. 6, draw any noticeable water sources and possible paths of the water. So if you have downspouts, notice where those downspouts are coming from. If you have rain coming from the street, where is that where is that? Draw that in. Draw any pollinator or animal habitats and wildlife corridors that you notice. Zero in on one specific garden bed for this go round. And that's where I showed you the whole big picture, but really we're just gonna focus on one garden bed. Choose one garden bed that you're gonna focus in for this year. Draw existing vegetation currently in that bed. So observe that bed, look closely and find out what those weeds are. And then this is where Dave comes in. List your future edible plant possibilities on the side of your paper with a key. For instance, 1 for tomatoes or T for tomatoes. And that looks like this design that I did for our front yard. So 1 was peony, 2 was yarrow flower, it's over here. 3 was shrub mid-size. So before you put the numbers, so like this is blank first, just put the numbers on your actual drawing, or you put them on the side first to give you like a key so that you can think about what you want to incorporate in your garden design. And Dave, now I will pass the mic to Dave. And sorry, I didn't even check to see what your questions were. So I
No,
hope
that's
they.
okay. I was just answering some of your questions, and
Okay, awesome.
just to get things started, and also kind of at the same time finishing up a few little blips and blurps in my slides. So we'll just swap at this point, I guess. Let me
Yes.
share.
Your free range bunny liked it.
Sorry, give me a minute for. Okay, so as Nikki alluded to, we're kind of wrapping up. We did this mini course, which was a sprouting course, which is just a 1-week course to jumpstart everybody during the winter time. But we're kind of wrapping up what we call the core course. So we have an awful lot of material, and we cover a lot of aspects of permaculture, but what we found is it can be pretty overwhelming for beginning gardeners. So what we've decided in this core course is to focus on all the steps involved in going from choosing your seeds, designing your bed, all the way to harvest for one specific raised bed, because then we can go into detail and make sure that the people don't get lost along the way. So things like composting and integrating perennials, we've decided that we'll put those in a separate course a little later with things that we're calling the master class. So the first part of that core course that Nikki went through is the design aspect. But once you've kind of got a rough structural layout of how you want your garden to look like, then you have to figure out what are the plants that you're actually going to choose to grow in your raised bed. So most of us are familiar with your common crops like tomato and melons, but then there's a whole range of plants that you can grow. In our yard, we have over 100 different varieties of edible plants. So knowing what's available to you to choose can really, you can really maximize your yield, because you're integrating everything into a kind of a more natural, diverse way of growing. So let's see if this works. One of the first things that we'll cover is just a very, very high level introduction to botany. So it's not going to be scary. It's just, it's useful when you're trying to figure out if you grow things from a specific plant family. They tend to have the same characteristics. And once you learn how to grow that family, then it doesn't matter if you're growing other members of the family. That because of those common characteristics, you can make some assumptions about other members of that family. So when you're growing annuals in a raised bed, these 7 plant families that you see here are pretty much going to be everything that you grow as an annual. So you won't really see anything else that falls outside of these 7 that is an annual vegetable. So very briefly, brassicas are kind of like your leafy cool crops. Umbellifers are things like carrots, dill. They tend to be root crops, but their little flowers are habitat for a lot of beneficial insects. You have cucurbits, which they can produce a lot of fruit. They prefer a hot climate, but they can really generate a lot of yield, so they can be like a main crop. You have the solanaceae, which mostly are the fruits are eaten, so that includes ground cherry, potato, tomato, pepper, and eggplant. You have amaranths, so Uh, Amaranths are also called chennopods, so things like spinach, beets, Swiss chard, quinoa, they're all in the amaranth family. They are leafy greens, but they all tend to have the same growth characteristic. You have legumes, which are useful for nitrogen fixation. In their roots, they have a symbiotic relationship with rhizobium, so they always add nitrates wherever you grow legumes. So whenever you're growing anything in an annual bed, you always want to include some legumes. Then you have alliums, which is your onions, garlic. These are really easy to grow because they're very slow growing, but then you can kind of fire and forget. So they don't require as much maintenance as some of these other families. So in the core course, we're going to go into a lot more detail about each of these things, but I'm just giving you a very quick overview of some of the things you want to consider when you're choosing your plants. So when you plan out your raised bed, a real easy rule of thumb that I like to use is you want to try to incorporate at least one member of each of these 7 families in your selection of the plants that you're going to put in your raised bed. Then we're going to cover plant guilds. So a lot of people have heard of companion planting, where supposedly some annuals like growing next to other annuals and they grow bigger. The problem is that information is not very, it's not very consistent because there's so many variables in terms of that. And the reality is most plants are actually neutral. They, about 80% of plants don't affect other plants that grow around them. So what in permaculture, what we like to do when we select plants that are companions is we use something called a plant guild, which focuses more on the functional aspects of the plant rather than which plant family it's in. So there's a couple categories I've listed here: vines, dynamic accumulators. So that's things that they have a deep root structure, so they bring up a lot of minerals from the ground. And then when you chop and distribute the leaves from these dynamic accumulators, it actually adds mineral content to your soil. So it's kind of like free fertilizer. You have insectary plants, which can either attract pollinators or they can confuse pest insects that might target. If all you had was a monocrop, that's kind of, and the insect that likes that monocrop discovers your garden, then it's a paradise for that pest. So what we're trying to do is diversify what we're growing so that what the insects see confuses them. They're not exactly sure whether or not this is going to be a good place to set up and reproduce. You have pollinators. So these are plants that attract things like butterflies or bees that we need to pollinate plants that need cross-pollination. Herbaceous includes perennials like blueberries and bush-sized plants, which in our small yards, we're probably not going to grow huge canopy trees. So probably the largest perennials we're going to grow are either small fruit trees or bushy berry type size trees. And then finally things like ground cover. So we're going to cover all aspects of this and then how you actually would practically apply this in a raised bed setting. So this is just a picture I threw in of one of our low tunnel covered beds. So you can see this is what we would like a raised bed to be. We would like it to be completely full of things that we're growing that we can eat. We'd like it to be diverse. So here in this low tunnel, I've got leeks growing, onions, beets, lettuce, turnips, collards, carrots. So you can see there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's really packed. So you can get an awful lot of production out of a single raised bed. A bed like this, in a single season, you should be able to get 20 to 30 pounds of produce. And with crop rotation, you can actually keep that going the whole year. So from a single bed, we should expect to get ideally a harvest production of 50 to 60 pounds over the course of a year. Some of the other things to consider when you're choosing your plants are the climate that you live in. So in North America, we have 3 different sub-regions of climate. Most people in America are in a temperate climate. So that means like a seasonal where you have a winter and then you have a hot summer. Drylands refers to areas of the country where precipitation is a factor. You have under 10 to 15 inches of rain, and you have to really design your plant systems because of that, because if you're planting things that require a lot of moisture, then you're going to really have to manage that differently than you would in a temperate climate. And then subtropical doesn't really have much of a winter, so the plants that are available to them are more numerous. So there's just different design considerations that you have to take into account. Other things that are affected by your climate is the planting calendar. So that determines some annuals can take as little as 40 to 50 days before you can get a harvest from them, whereas others can take up to 150 days before you can harvest them. So, sorry, pardon me. It's good to know to match that against your climate, and we'll talk a little bit about how you can look at the plants that you're interested in and your climate, specifically your zip code, to be able to figure out the ideal starting date for your plants and the date where you can kind of expect that you'll be starting to harvest that plant. I've written a blog about 6 months ago. Once you've gone through all of those things, another thing to consider is whether it's worth your while to grow some of these crops. So we'll get into a little bit of information about the kind of yields that you can expect for different crops, whether they're actually worth growing, because in some cases it might actually be better to purchase the plant, but there are some high value crops, and we also want to grow things that are easier to grow if we can help it. So we'll talk a little bit about how you match that balance between what you'd like to grow and what's actually worth growing. And then finally, in this section of the core course, we're going to cover, you know which plants you want to get. Now, how do you find the seeds online to get the right types of seeds that will grow? We'll talk briefly about heirloom versus GM or hybrid seeds, and some of the resources that you can use, some resources that we found that are useful for, that are reliable, that we've used over the past couple of years for getting your seeds and your rootstock and plant material. So it's going to be a lot of information, but we want to keep everything practical, so at the end of this, you feel confident that you can figure out which plants you'd like to grow and be able to get started, get all the seeds that you need, and be successful in actually growing them in a raised bed. Okay, so that's the end of my little part. Improv. So Nix, did you want to, I think we're out of the presentation portion of this.
Great, thanks. I hope that was helpful. yeah, other than that, that was the end of what I had to say too. I just wanted, that was like how you could design or plan. So thinking of planning your 2019 garden, I think you can start with what we've given you. um, but if you have any specific questions, I I know Carrie, we will follow up with you with the leaf curl question you had and clay soil. So with clay soil, I directed you to the blog on lasagna gardening that you might want to do in the spring, perhaps, or now you can do it because you're in California. So you could probably start right away if you wanted to. But
So
clay
Carrie,
soil.
it appears that you're the only one online tonight.
Mhm.
So even if it's a bit noisy in the background,
We don't mind.
yeah, you can just set.
We have 6 kids. It's not like it's not any different. It's noisy in our house all the time, except at 8 o'clock when they're asleep.
Or listening to us on the webinar like they are right now.
They're listening in, the girls.
Maybe. Well, maybe she is just having it in the background.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess that's it. Unless you have any other specific questions, Carrie. We hope that this has been helpful, really, and that you do get to anybody watching the replay is able to take some of this. I know Danielle Beer, you've been designing for a long time now, so yours is probably a PDC, permaculture design course certificate worthy design, and I'd love to see how it's grown and help you implement it for sure this coming 2019. Help each one of you implement it. So if there are any design questions that you feel we have not addressed, kindly shoot us an email, because as we create this course, or put it on the new forum that we have, that's, as we create this course, we do want your feedback because we're creating it for you with you in mind, and anything that you need to know about installing your garden, we would like to be able to help you with or find the resources to help you with. So that's it. That's it for tonight. Thank you so much, Carrie, for participating. We will follow up with an email on those 2 things, leaf curl, kitchen gardens, and clay soil. Is there anything else, Dave, that I missed regarding Carrie's notes or questions?
I think he's interested in doing raised beds, so the lasagna thing is going to be probably the most
Right.
relevant.
Okay, well, we wish you a blessed holiday season, and we will talk to you again next month. All right? Okay, shall we sign off? Okay, bye, Carrie.